So a lot of the movements you're talking about are very based on the internet because of the internet, and so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the issues of net neutrality that we're seeing. Like April 5th, the House just reaffirmed an anti-net neutrality measure. Essentially, if you don't know what's going on for anybody here, what companies, internet service providers are trying to do is they're trying to actually force websites to pay to be on their network. So that would increase the prices of not just having internet, but you might also have to pay to access websites. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts with regards to what that would do to these movements that you've been talking about, and whether you know of any artists that are mobilizing against it.
I don't, but I imagine that they would suffer because we can't afford to pay big internet companies, and we can't really afford to have a big widespread audience. And like a major reason why these movements are gaining so much ground is because of the democratic nature of the internet, because everything's accessible through it. So I think it would be really terrible for them.
I mean, I think that's like definitely like part of the shame, and when movements get so much attention that yeah, it's not always positive attention, you know. And I definitely think that I'm surprised it's like taken this long, honestly. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll just you find a way to get your ideas out there. You find a different platform if it becomes completely inaccessible, right? I mean, that would just take the accessibility out of. Yeah.
So do you think that they would find or develop another way?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think like one of the bedrocks of these movements, and also just one of their greatest strengths, is that they are very flexible and very resourceful. So if there's not a way, they find a way. To kind of like use a personal anecdote, I actually worked at Elsewhere last spring, and they thought that they were going to get shut down because of like building codes. And so like the first thing that they started doing was like, okay, how can we continue to operate under different auspices? And I think that all these movements are like that. Like they'll keep going even if like one pathway is closed.
Are there any other questions?
Sure.
Hi. So the gentleman at the end, I was wondering, with fuel costs and shipping costs expected to continue rising, how do you think that will affect Etsy and similar sites' distribution? Especially, as you said, with things going to London, the price point of a lot of the craft items has a lot to do with their accessibility, and when you rely on distribution the way that they do to get something from Chicago to London or to Austin or whatever, how do you anticipate those artists working around these new resource and fuel-based issues?
Well, I think that might be an issue for a lot of people because I've met artists and crafters in my own personal life who travel to all the craft fairs around the country in order to sell their goods. So I think if things like flight costs really went up, because these people don't have a lot of money in the first place, I think that become difficult. But I think that the craft world has a bit of its own solution because even though distribution and why distribution has worked so well, there's a lot of local focus in craft, and there's things like the DIY Trunk Show in Chicago in November is only for people which can get to Chicago in a 5-mile drive or less. Those are the only people really allowed in, and there's a lot of local craft fairs that are smaller that are popping up. There's just one called there's one that just popped up in October I was looking at today. So I think that Urban Craft Circuit, yeah. So I think that though distribution has really helped people through these websites, I think that the local focus could at least give them a cushion if these prices just continue to raise.
Can I add to that? So your question, I think, was directed into two different ways that it's easy to get confused with what Zachary presented. First, you were asking about fuel costs in terms of Etsy sales. What would happen is Etsy would probably their artists would raise shipping costs. So artists on the Etsy website who have shops will sell for, they'll set their own shipping cost, and it'll be based on country. So they would raise that cost. Now at the fairs, that is, like Zachary said, very local focused. So most people at those fairs are based out of that region. So the Austin would be primarily Austin artists. However, because Renegade is based in Chicago, they travel themselves to put on these fairs to Austin, to London, San Francisco, Brooklyn, all those other places. So it would be hard for the people who do travel, and they would have to base that into maybe the price points of their pieces. But like with the locals, it would probably not affect them too much in the pricing of their pieces.
Yeah, and I'm sure that like they're already aware. I mean, shipping is.
Is wider audience accessibility and understanding defining an era in the art world?
Could you repeat that question just a little louder?
Is wider audience accessibility and understanding defining an era in the art world?
I think so, yeah. I definitely think so. There's actually a book out called Museum 2.0, written by this woman who was actually an engineer, Nina Simon. And she, I think it's kind of like indicative of a lot of discourse that's being written by now, or has been written lately about accessibility in museums, for example. And she calls for more interactivity, like doing things like having visitors being able to like write their own gallery labels and things like that. And I think it's really important because things like institutions like museums are losing money and they're losing their audience because the audience is changing. And so, and the type of consumer that's out there now they don't want to just like go look at something, they want to be a part of the conversation, they want to contribute. So, yeah, I definitely say that's changing the face of the art world, for sure.
Yeah, Zachary and I were actually just having this conversation last week, and we both thought the same thing, that just the pure democracy of it all, and just the fact that the audience is engaging with the artwork, and the audience is interacting and asking to be a part of this now. We were wondering, what is the next part of art theory? What is the next place that art is going to? And we agreed that it was art accessibility. It was a wider audience participation. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and if we think about like the show at the MTA right now, I think it's called Without You I'm Nothing. Like,
Yeah,
that's actually really indicative of like a lot of the kind of cutting edge shows that are happening in museums specifically around the country.
And it's a participatory show where you can enter and touch basically
things
almost all the art pieces basically.
And like interact with them. And then, yeah, that's actually becoming very, very typical. And I know that the curator who took up that project, after I think another curator resigned, is a younger curator. And interestingly, she got rid of some more expensive pieces in order to allocate some of the budget to bring in local artists to have like interactive performance pieces. And I think that's also like a trend that's happening a lot. This focus on the locality.
Something else about that show too is that like it was curated from the collection at the MCA, and actually a lot of that artwork stretches pretty far back. So I think it's interesting to think about like these aren't like brand new ideas by any means.
Yeah.
But there's something about the internet that like really amplifies like the audience's expectations for accessibility.
Well, I think that also has to do a lot with like the idea that some of those artworks go kind of far back has a lot to do with like the slipperiness of curating from a collection, and that they kind of have to like bring other things that aren't like normally a part of that category into that category because they're working from a limited object set. So
and already like super small collection.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you guys think that from like this influence coming from like the internet, do you think that there's like a tension happening in the museums also, like curators who are trying to kind of stick to tradition as opposed to implementing these new like democratic means of experiencing the art?
I definitely think so.
Could you think of like any examples or elaborate on it a little bit?
I just remember something that I read a while ago. Actually, it was on the Museum 2.0 blog, because the older model of curating, I think, is that it's based on the idea of the artwork being like this almost like sacred object, and you're supposed to go into the museum and have this like communal experience, and a lot of curators and kind of stodgy art historians are still kind of treated that way, and to an extent, I think objects that were made in that vein, perhaps, you know, it's justifiable that they should be still curated in that way, but art that's being made now is not meant to be seen in that way, so I definitely think that there's like, as with any new movement, there's going to be intergenerational tension. I mean, that's just how it goes.